Welcome back to the Daily Dean. Today we're going to be talking about aging. So, when do you think is old? Just a very abstract question to start off with. Give you a moment to think about it. Okay, enough thinking. When people think of old, I'd imagine around over 65. Legally, that's when you're a senior, right? And that's when you're getting all these cool, mystical powers related to over the age of 65. But you don't really become anything different from the moment you're, 1 second away from your 65th birthday, right? So it's kind of a blurry spectrum between when is seniorism and old and other things like that. So I personally believe that it's affected by your mindset, right? I want you to think back to when you were in first grade. That would have been when you were 6 years old, around that span. And think about fourth graders, right? A fourth grader is 3 years older than you. They're about 9 years old. And in comparison to your entire lifespan, that's 50% longer. 50% of 6 is 3, add that to 6, that becomes 9. Right, a fourth grader is going to be like way older than you in comparison to all that you've ever known and experienced, right? In terms of like a 20-year-old and a 23-year-old, the gap isn't that large, right? There's not a lot of like difference in their mindsets that, makes you think, oh, that 23-year-old is ancient, in the same way that you think, oh my gosh, that fourth grader is huge, right? So if the perspective that you have on old changes with your mindset, then the definition of old has also, by relation, should be affected by your mindset as well, right? So I don't know if you've ever considered that, or maybe I've just formally put your thoughts into words because I've thought about it. But let's think about this in terms of a 40-year-old, right? A 40-year-old, a person who's 40 years old and a person who's 60 years old, that 60-year-old has lived 50% longer than that 40-year-old. And that comparison is comparable to a first grader and a fourth grader, right? To a very large gap in terms of, oh my gosh, look at them. And just that in general, that, whoa, they're pretty old. And that's how I see it. Again, my personal opinion and thoughts that I'm sharing with you. But there's something interesting about aging. Time will passively pass faster because the time that you've spent on this earth has increased, right? When you're 2 years old, the last year was 50% of your entire lifespan. But when you're 10 years old, the past year you've experienced was only 10% of the entire lifespan that you've experienced. So each year that passes by gradually gets smaller and smaller in comparison to the rest of your life. The jump from 1 year to 2 years, 50%. The jump from 9 to 10, only 10%. Think about how fast time must be passing for an 80-year-old who's experienced 80 years of lifetime. The last year must have whooshed by, right? Which is why age tends to be, your early childhood memories tend to be a lot more memorable. If you don't remember a lot of your childhood, you and me both, there's some things that I just don't have great memory with, and it's probably things related to when I was like 5 or 4 or 6 or whatever, right? Well, point being, age is pretty crazy. And I want to talk about some old people stuff as well. Once again, in context of like 65 years and older. Did you know that if you reach the age of 80, you'll actually, on average, live 9 years longer, right? As opposed to somebody who didn't, right? That's just the correlation between how many more years you can expect to live, and etc. And there's also something related to that. If you're a centenarian, somebody who's over 100 years old, or somebody who is 100 years old or older, you'll actually be more healthy in terms of agility, in terms of strength, in terms of cognition, memory and stuff, than people who are 80 or 90 years old. The idea is that a person who lives to 100 naturally is slightly more fit and robust than somebody who is in their 80s and 90s, the majority of which, or a large portion of which, are facing complications with their health and their mind and body and stuff. So I've read it was in my textbook. I was reading about it. If you have a relative who is over 100 years old, you yourself can expect to be more healthy by the time you're 100 years old, because they passed down your genetics, or you have some genes from that old person who is living 100 years old. And the term you can look up is longevity, right? How long you retain your health and stuff. And that's a pretty neat little tidbit. And also, kind of less happy, 30% of, or actually, oh, I shouldn't use numbers like that. A large portion, like, to me, intuitively, of people who go into nursing homes will actually be administered antipsychotic medicine, even though they don't show any psychotic symptoms. Psychotic means, like, break from reality, right? People who experience hallucinations or delusions are given antipsychotic medicine to help combat that. And even though elderly patients don't experience those symptoms, they'll still be given, a large portion of people will still be given these antipsychotic medicine by medicines, treatment, right? Even though they don't require it from these nurses, officials, and other people. So, food for thought. That's kind of scary. But related to that, if you are healthy, you don't really need to go into a nursing home. So the idea that comes from this is that these are people who have like lesser physical capabilities and cognition and cognitive abilities that then result in this this idea from nurses and officials to subdue or manage these patients better by giving them these medicines even though they don't need them. But there's just a whole mess of stuff that I wasn't aware of that came with being an elderly person that I'm now aware of that maybe I shouldn't be thinking about, but now I'm sharing with you because I thought it was interesting. So that's pretty much it. Old people, pretty interesting stuff. So that's all. Thank you. Bye.